Coming up on today's episode of the Salesman podcast.
I'm watching stuff about empathy. I'm watching computers being able to read body language. I'm watching things about, robots being able to understand your emotions.
Hello, Sales Nation. I'm Will Barron, host of the Salesman podcast, and welcome to today's episode. In today's show, we have the return of John Barrows. John came on a couple of months ago now, and the show did really well. Loads of downloads, loads of questions and feedback from you guys. So I've asked John to come back on, and we're diving into a similar topic to last time. That is, what can sales professionals do that computers can't? So we can double down on these things and essentially, as much as what we can, perhaps future-proof our skill sets. You can find out more about John over at jbarrows.com. There's loads of content on there. He's got an online sales training academy as well, which is well worth checking out. And with that all said, let's jump into today's episode. Hey, John, and welcome back to the Salesman podcast.
Hey, Will, it's good to be back.
I'm glad to have you on, mate. I'm going to pick up the discussion from what we had last time. I'll link to this in the show note to this episode over at salesman.red. And I want to continue it forward because I think we went down a whole load of rabbit holes and a whole load of tangents, which I'm sure we'll do again. But it was a fascinating episode, and the audience, Sales Nation, wanted actively requested you and bombarded me with emails to get you back on to continue this. So I want to pick it up from where we left off by asking you essentially the question in that: are there any aspects of sales? Obviously, a leading question here. Hopefully I know where you're going to go with this. Are there any aspects of sales that can't be done better by a computer either now or in 10 years' time?
Yeah. I mean, it's getting harder and harder to answer that question. I think the whole "what can you do that a computer can't" thing. Artificial intelligence that we talked about last time is just. I'm starting to see things just even more accelerated from when we talked last time. For instance, my iPhone, I walked into my friend's place who I hadn't seen in 5 years, and I worked for Jack Welch, GE Jack Welch, for a couple of months. Literally, his only connection to Jack Welch is me, okay? He's never Googled Jack Welch or anything like that. I walked into his apartment 5 years, and literally he opens up his Facebook, and there's an ad from Jack Welch, and it was like, whew, you know what I mean? Like, so it's starting, so all that targeting, all that stuff. But I think the human piece here is that still a lot of customers, and I get to this with reps a lot, which is customers don't always know what they need. Right? They kind of assume they think they know what they need. They know they have a problem, but they might not know how big the problem is. And I think it's going to be really hard for a computer to genuinely uncover the real need and the real value that any solution can bring to a business. You know what I mean? Like, I think there's only so many click-throughs and trees that you can take somebody down. When they know what they want, when they absolutely have, I have this problem and I need this solution, then you can do that. But I think when people are like, I have a problem. I don't necessarily know what it is. I think I know what the answer is. I know there's some kind of solutions out there. Let me do a Google search on that, whatever. But I still think there's that discovery phase, that the value that a rep can bring to the table is really asking the right questions. And this is why I don't care how experienced we are in sales. I think something we can all get better at is asking better questions. Is just figuring out how to ask better questions, more insightful questions, layering questions. There's the basic open-ended, close-ended, whatever. But I'm really focused these days on layering questions. Like, could you explain to me how? Could you give me an example of? Could you clarify for me? That's one. It's an objection handling technique, but it's also a questioning technique. It's just called the clarification approach, where when somebody objects to you, I almost never take that objection for face value anymore, or their answer for face value anymore. I'm almost always like, could you tell me a little bit more about that? Could you explain, could you clarify for me? Because then once you start getting into those levels and really understanding, then you can start to say, well, have you thought of this? Have you thought of that? And that's also that thing where I think sales professionals done right can differentiate, which is getting you to think.
Let me go on a limb here for a second, because computers can ask questions and from the answers can go yes, no. And obviously it's way more complex than that. And there's AI, which can be embedded and that kind of thing into it. is it a safe bet to say that the salesperson who's been successful in 10 years is essentially doing a similar kind of process, but what they can input into it, which a computer will find very difficult to for, decades to come, is empathy and understanding emotions and being able to not read body language by consciously seeing and mirroring people to build rapport and all that kind of stuff, but on the gut level, be able to understand and articulate perhaps better what the problem is back to the prospect rather than the prospect telling them what it is. So obviously they can move forward with that. Is that what, and we might have just ended this conversation short here, but is that what salespeople should be focusing on 100%, nailing down this ability and this emotional intelligence and this ability to have empathy with a customer? Is that what we should be focusing on now? And is that going to be the key thing in 10 years' time that really enables us to close deals?
I mean, yeah, I think empathy is always the human element here, but I mean, I'm watching stuff about empathy. I'm watching computers being able to read body language. I'm watching things about, robots being able to understand your emotions, right? I mean, they can't understand, they don't have an emotion, but they can understand yours and they can adjust accordingly. So I think that's even something that is going to be a challenge for us in 10 years, if you will. So, I think it's tough because I think we are being forced to be more empathetic, more knowledgeable, more curious. I think the genuine curiosity, here's maybe an angle I could take with the questions, because you're right, a computer could ask questions, but I think there's a genuine curiosity that I found in my career that has really taken my my ability to engage, my ability to empathize with people to another level, which is, just like genuine curiosity out of business. And I think that's why, for instance, I don't like being on panels. I don't like being one of the panel people that get asked a question for the most part. I love asking questions. I love being the person that's the person moderating the panel and saying, well, what do you mean by, like, tell me a little bit, because I'm trying to learn. You know what I mean? Like, me personally, I'm trying to learn something. And that's where I've always said to people from a social sales standpoint is, where social selling really flipped for me was educating myself first and then posting stuff out there with context around it about why I thought it was interesting or whatever. And I think that's really where, the genuine curiosity, the empathy, those type of things, asking better questions to connect with people at a more, why do they want to do this as opposed to why do they have to do this level. That's where we can still make a difference. And I do think it's, I always talk about this with, okay, AI and all this stuff. I mean, it's here, it'll be here in a few years. It'll be, 10 years down the road, who knows? But being in the SaaS world and working with a lot of the tech companies, I'm just being exposed to it a lot more, and I'm way more in tune to it. So I don't think all sales reps. I think there's going to be certain industries that almost never evolve. You know what I mean? I think it's going to be almost always, like, my wife sells. She's a sustainability consultant, and she sells to local governments, facilities and, those type of people. And it's just like, they're about as old school as it gets. Now, I think there's going to be a tide shift, obviously, when millennials then get into the government and those type of things. But, for a pretty decent chunk of the near future, like, I don't think that industry is going to change all that much.
So is this led then by, and this seems like as I'm saying it, it seems like a daft question. Is this going to be led by buyers and what they want, in that they want to deal with a human and they want to have that empathetic conversation, and they want to have that curious conversation and an interesting conversation, because that adds value as well. If you're an interesting person, people want to engage with you whether they're buying from you or not. Is this all buyer led versus what technology can do?
A little bit. I think the spectrum, if you will, of buyer led. I think it's going to get more and more where people don't want to talk to sales reps because they don't want to be sold. You know what I mean? Like, nobody still in our history and still today, nobody wants to be sold on anything. People want to be educated. People want to learn. People want to be led to, okay, yeah, I need this. Thanks for helping me out. That's why you see a big trend where, there's executives that I hear all the time and say, I'm never hiring sales reps. I'm just going to hire customer service people, and I'm going to do inbound lead generation. And then when they have a question, they get to talk to a customer service rep who's educated and who knows what they're talking about. And to me, I actually think that's where things are headed right now. Like, I think the inbound SDR role is has to elevate. Like, it has to elevate to the point where, because the inbound usually is the entree point for sales reps. But if you think about it, if you follow challenger sale and those type of things, by the time somebody comes to us, they're already 60 to 70% of the way through. So that inbound lead, if you've already gone through 60 to 70% of the sales process, you don't want to talk to some 22-year-old wet behind the ear kid who doesn't know what they're talking about, right? And is just going to ask you bant questions. You want to talk to somebody who knows what they're talking about. So I actually think that that role is going to end up being a more senior level position. And maybe those sales reps who have been in the field forever and are just sick of flying around and whatever, it's just like, you know what? Yeah, let's do this. Pay me a higher base salary. Don't give me real commissions. You know what I mean? And just let me over service people. I think so. So I think the need to talk to somebody, back to your question, is gonna be there, but I think the desire to talk to somebody is gonna get pushed further, if you know what I mean. Like, and also product dependent too. Like, if it's a super complex product, obviously that's going to be an earlier engagement. But if the more
But
products.
on you, let me jump in here because you're
Yep.
painting this magical picture of, and if you can achieve this, it's incredible. Of you put out amazing content, you get people hooked. They're being educated on your content rather than your competitors' content. They come to you at 60% through the buying cycle, and they just need the deal facilitating as opposed to be sold. What happens for all the other companies within the industry who aren't able to achieve that? Should they be fighting for this and competing with perhaps the big boy? Like, if we look at CRMs, obviously Salesforce puts out so much like crazy good content, and so their model can really go like that. But if you were starting a small or smaller, it could still be a huge company, but a smaller CRM business or something in that realm, it's going to be very difficult to grab the attention away from the likes of Salesforce and the other companies in that space. And from that, and obviously we want competition, we want new companies coming on the scene. Will there be perhaps a trend then of outbound for small companies who then want to move into this magical land of inbound, or will it always just be inbound?
No, 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 no. I mean, that's why you see account-based marketing and account-based selling, all of a sudden becoming so hot these days. I still don't understand it because it's been around forever, but whatever, just because there's a new acronym on it,
Mhm.
everybody's on top of it now. Now marketing, if you look at marketing, right? I understand account-based marketing now. I don't, anybody who talks about account-based selling right now should just tell them to shut up. But account-based marketing, sure, because marketing used to be just blast out a million,
Mhm.
and then, but now it's like, okay, we're going after our target audience. And if you know who your target audience is and you can market to them, I actually think that it's going to move towards, for instance, you know how you have like an SDR and an AE teamed up, like so one SDR or BDR partners with three AEs or something like that. I
Just
see
go
the,
through those acronyms.
sorry,
We've
yeah,
covered it on the show before, but just in case
sure.
people haven't seen those episodes.
Sales development rep, business development rep. Those are either the reps that take the inbounds or that do the outbounds and set up call like meetings for AEs, account executives, who then take it to close, right? So usually you have one SDR or BDR that sets up meetings for three or four AEs. I think that's going to end up being you would now assign a marketing person to that pod.
Mm.
So now you're going to have this pod of people that are going after account-based stuff. And that's why I think it's going to get into, yeah, Salesforce. It's hard to compete with Salesforce at a broad level. But if you find that niche, it's not that hard, right? Because they obviously are good and bad in certain areas. And if you find your niche, if you're trying to go up against Salesforce, good luck. You better get a lot of funding and you better, go out. But if you find your niche and you say, okay, I know exactly who my target audience is, which I think a lot of businesses out there and sales reps, by the way, fail at, and which is why they waste a lot of time and energy. They don't really understand who their target audience is, who that prime, like who is the most, to me, that is everything because that allows you as a sales professional to go after somebody in a very thoughtful outbound way and get them to think and get them to break through the noise of all the marketing. Whereas kind of the average accounts for you, or the poor accounts for you, or kind of the masses, that's what marketing is going to do. But I think sales is going to be forced to more and more to go to that account base. Like, look, these are the 100 accounts that we are assigning to you as a sales rep. Your job is to get into these. Like, forget about the territory. Like, these are your 100 accounts. Come up with a strategy. You need to penetrate a certain percentage of them over the, and I think that's where that outbound, let me get in touch with you, let me be thoughtful, let me send you shit in the mail, those type of things that are coming back, is going to really help differentiate.
And again, this is something that a computer would have difficulty doing, because a computer can't really network. They can't really, ring round and go up and down the buying kind of power within the business. It's very, perhaps they could do that, but it's artificial, it's weird, and you'd feel like, again, as you described at the top of the show, you'd feel like you're being sold if you got this automated email from a computer saying, which unfortunately is very similar to what most salespeople send of, hey, are you the decision maker? I want to speak to XYZ. Otherwise, can you introduce me to them? Which is obviously a horrible way of going about it. Uncustomized emails on that front. And what I want to get out of today's show, John, just to reframe everything that we're talking about, is there may be 1, 2, 3, 4 elements of sales, or elements of perhaps marketing that we need to learn, or account management, whatever it is, that a computer can't do. And so we should double down and focus and train ourselves, read books, podcasts, whatever it is, to become better at it as an investment now for in 10 years' time. We've covered kind of empathy, curiosity, questions. Are there any other kind of big areas that we should really be doubling down on to kind of hedge our bets over the RoboCop when he comes running?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the context versus content thing that I'll continue to give Gary Vee credit for, because it really is something that gets me to. That's where I think differentiates sales versus marketing. Right, marketing is content, sales is context. That's where I think we can differentiate over robots. Right, robots are content. We put context around that. So I think if the whole industry expert thing, which I think is totally overplayed and overused, and also is dangerous, to teach, to try to tell pretend a 22-year-old kid's going to be a thought leader, is a joke. Like, I'm 40 years old right now.
Is it
right?
really though? I just want to challenge you on this slightly, because as you go back to what you said previous, of if you've got your niche small enough, your niche could be, for me in medical devices, it was having a physical territory around my house that I could drive to without breaking my neck, kind of with stress of traffic and stuff. And I inadvertently was a thought leader within that tiny niche of, if any of the urologists wanted to loan kit, if they wanted advice on kit, they wanted kind of advice on updating the surgical procedures, they would come to me. So that, it's a strong phrase to use, thought leader, and I wouldn't have used it at the time, and I probably wouldn't use it now, but, a niche expert. Is that really something that can't be achieved by a millennial listening to this?
How long did it take you to do that? And what did you do to get there?
Well, let's go through it. So I worked for one company down south in the south of the UK, and I was always kind of like top 20% sales rep, not kind of breaking records, but doing okay. I then moved up to a company up here. So I took some of the contacts I had down there up with me. So that bearing in mind, it was about a year in from working in the territory that I am now, which is about an hour, 2 hours kind of logistically driving around, say 50 big accounts. So there's not that many people that I need to get on board and show that I have the knowledge of it. So it took about a year, and the process was very simple. I would, of course, go in, try and sell them stuff, but then I was very keen on supporting them on the training. So I'd go to, if there was training events on, I would go to my sales manager, whether it's getting kit delivered there and helping them out, and allowing the surgeons to do training with the best kit available versus all the crappy broken scopes that they have, which should be binned and destroyed, but they don't. They keep them to one side and they're used for all the training. And things like that. It was small favors that build up into then a conversation. I'm inviting myself in to have a conversation, and then they get to test my knowledge. Of course, these alpha surgeons that know it all, and of course they know an awful lot. But again, niching down in my very specific niche of these endoscopes, I could school a lot of them because they weren't as well trained as what they thought they were. So that was the kind of pathway for it.
So yes. So if you put it that way, as far as niche market, really being thoughtful about educating yourself and, and selling to a very specific and understanding where your strengths and weaknesses are, sure, you can get there. But my question is what percentage of kids coming out of school are in that situation, right? And so I think that we're putting these kids into situations and saying, we throw out thought leader, you have to be a thought leader, but yet we tell them to call into the manufacturing industry, the healthcare industry, the SaaS industry, talk to a CFO, talk to a CIO, you know what I mean? And our products are kind of broad and, whatever. So it's like, that's damn near impossible. And also, I think there just needs to be a certain business acumen that you need to have in order to be able to have those. And I don't think you get that I didn't really understand. I was a quote unquote industry expert in IT services when I was 22. I did the same thing. I sat in server rooms. I learned the lingo. I kind of knew enough to be dangerous and ask the right questions, those type of things. But I wasn't really able to truly be genuinely curious, truly be that what I would consider a thought leader until in my 30s when I really understood business and I really understood why people should or shouldn't do certain things, and I stopped being so concerned with hitting my monthly number and doing those type of things. Like I think we're putting ourselves in a bad position as sales organizations. I hate monthly numbers. I hate, those type of things because it forces I don't care, I just got to hit this. So I can't, and why spend time reading up on my craft if I do that for a long-term benefit but I'm going to miss my number here and I'm going to get fired. So it's kind of like, the sad state of where I think we are. And it was articulated by, and I don't want to bring politics into this, by a politician. I'm not going to say who it was, but they talked about how there was this study about, the CEOs of the top 50 companies in the world. And they said, look, if you could invest right now in something that you knew in 5 years was going to make a significant impact on your business, your share, all that other stuff, but it was going to cost you one penny on your stock price today, would you do it? 50 out of 50 of them said no. Because they said, look, if I did that, if I lost one penny off then my shareholders would be pissed off and I wouldn't even get to those 5 years. So that's why everything's such a short-term thing here. So that's why I think, the right mentality of being a thought leader, I want to get there, but that's why I go back to educating yourself first. And so few people do that anymore.
Well, let me just interrupt you again, John. I know I'm going back and forth with this, and I appreciate your patience. But what I want to get out of this show again is that what can we hedge? What can we invest in now that in 5-10 years time it becomes more useful? But when you say education, that's quite broad. And I want to narrow it down as much as what we can. Again, we've gone through empathy, emotional intelligence, that kind of thing. Perhaps if you're going to stay in the same industry for 10 years and you've got a manager that will support you, and it doesn't have to perhaps be in the same company, you can move around within the industry, but thought leadership is the kind of the light at the end of the tunnel if you can get there. What in education, what should we be educating ourselves specifically now that in 5-10 years time is going to make our lives like crazy simple as salespeople?
Nothing. It ain't shit gonna make our lives crazy simple in sales. All right. But if you look at it that way, I look at it as right now, my daughter's 6 years old. Okay. And she's going into school and No Child Left Behind here in the States, and they teach to the test. And what I'm trying to do right now is I'm trying to teach my kid how to think. Like how to I don't care if she fails a math test. I really don't. I don't use algebra anymore. I don't use, any biology crap that I learned in college. But I learned how to think. And so I think that, and that's what I'm trying to do when I train reps. It's no longer about the one technique or the one thing or whatever it is. It's the structure of how to learn and how to apply that structure to any scenario that we go into. So if I'm in medical devices, but then next year I'd sell IT services, I can take that same structure, apply it to that, and then and evolve a lot faster. And so that's really, to me, like I bring it up, the number one thing, and I think this is going to be one of your questions. Again, I think I answered this last time too, which is, if you could go back, tell your 22-year-old self something, what would it be? My answer is split testing, A/B split testing, and having that mindset to pick something every day and say, what do I need to work on today? What do I want to learn today? All right. Well, out of all the other shit that I'm doing, this is what I want to figure out. So I'm going to take two different approaches to this and see if it works. And then start to kind of hone in on what my style is, what works for me, because what works for you is going to be different than what works for me. But if I put a structure in place on how to figure that out and keep iterating and trying new things and trying new things and applying it to that process, that's where in 10 years AI comes out, completely erases the need for people. I can then say, okay, well, now how do I learn this new thing? How do I apply the structure that I've applied across the board to now this so that I can evolve? And that to me, those are the people that are going to survive.
So perhaps I'm looking for a magic bullet here that doesn't exist. Is it, or is that the magic bullet that we just need to keep on top of? We need to keep on top of what the industry is doing, which builds into the business acronym side of things. And you know, is this what I guess where I'm going at with this? Is it an organic process then that you just every day you read your industry papers, you network with people that perhaps you're not even selling to, but are involved in the industry in different levels, and you're doing all these things that in 10 years' time you just happen to be the thought leader who is on top of everything and who's kicking AI's ass where everyone else is still cold calling. Is that the magic bullet of just daily progress, daily tiny steps?
I mean, I have 12 guidelines to success, right? 12 guiding principles. And one of them is the rule of 1%. And set the bar at a high but attainable. This is raving fans. You had brought it up earlier. Like it's set the bar at a high but attainable level, and then every day just get 1% better. And that is everything that I focus on. I at the end of the day, I legitimately look at myself and I say, was I better today than I was yesterday? And if I can answer that genuinely, yes, then I know I'm moving in the right direction. So I think yes, the continuous improvement, the Kaizen approach from the Japanese manufacturing, right? If you are not if you are not focused on that, if you are comfortable right now, you're gonna get replaced. If you are comfortable, if you think right now, you know what, and I say this to customers, look, I do really well with customers that are looking to evolve and get better and that type of thing. I don't do too well with customers who feel like everything's okay right now. Which one are you? Right? And obviously people are like, well, it's okay, but I could always get better. All right, well then, if that's the case, because and to me, that's that lens that you have to put on is yes, I think we should keep educating ourselves. We have to stay on top of what's going on right now. Because do you want to wake up one day and have that thing just, I mean, you can only prepare for so much, I will say, but there are people where they woke up one day and they were irrelevant. And I don't want to be that person. And it's because those people, and I genuinely feel bad, there are people that work in industries that, they just want to get up at 8 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock in the morning. They want to go to their job. They want to do whatever miserable thing it is. And they want to come home at 6 o'clock and just be with their family, support their kid, put their kid through college. And they don't want to get evolved. I get it. I understand that. That's a different mentality that I have, but I understand that. But I genuinely feel bad for that mentality because it's inevitable right now with how fast technology is moving that one day they're going to wake up and go, crap, I'm now irrelevant. And now, like manufacturing here in the States, all these people are bitching and moaning about immigrants taking their jobs. It's not immigrants taking their jobs, it's technology taking their jobs. If you're going to protest about something, protest San Francisco. Don't protest the Mexicans, for crying out loud, because that's what's happening. Those jobs aren't coming back. You know what I mean? And I think we're in a bad spot here in the States because our education system has changed in the sense that when we went from the farms to the manufacturing, our education system fundamentally changed. We said, okay, well, we now need to teach kids about manufacturing instead of farming. And then when we went from manufacturing to the office, right, our education system shifted. Said, okay, well, now we need to teach kids not how to be manufactured, but how to be in the office environment. That was back in the 40s, I think. You know what I mean? Like our education system here in the States has not changed at all. And technology now in the information age, it has to shift. You know what I mean? Like we're still teaching kids something that 40 years ago was relevant. It's just not history. Okay, yeah, it's important in history. Math and all these different things. It's fine, but
Well, you could almost replace, and I'm a big fan of conspiracy theories, even though they're all
totally, yeah.
nonsense. But you could
Not
also
all of them.
you could almost replace. That's probably another conversation to have
Totally, yeah.
between
I'll get
us.
stoned with you and we can have that
Um,
conversation.
but there's plenty of evidence, and there's plenty of people on the record suggesting that you can replace the word teaching with training, and essentially where the education system trains people to go into somewhere to work for 8 hours or whatever it is, to come home, to want to have the next car or whatever it is, and keep moving forward and get into debt and get into traps and buy your house with a crap load of debt on the end of it, so then you can't leave your job and all these kind of things. And there's conspiracies one way or the other. And of course, people are sold and marketed, and the economy, especially in the US, and that trickles down to everywhere else, wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the kind of American dream and white picket fence and all that kind of stuff. But I don't think there's many of those people listening to this show who are wrapped up in all that, because you're probably unlikely to seek out a podcast on sales unless you are actively wanting to improve yourself within sales. Which leads me on to this, John. There's probably the 10 to 20,000 people listening to this now. Most of them are probably driving in the car. They're probably going, "Oh shit, where do I start with all this? To improve myself, I could go and get a better haircut. I could, sign up to your online training portal, which we'll come on to at the end of the show. I could do this training. I could start reading these books. I could get out of the industry I'm in because it probably won't be relevant in 10 years' time. I could do all this stuff." Is there a question, or is there a methodology to get really practical about all this, for what the people listening, and myself perhaps, what we can ask ourselves right now to kind of suss out what is the one thing that we should be working on to improve ourselves today?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I'm probably gonna say, I'm gonna think out loud here for a minute, but I think it's about. I'll go back to this. I think one of the worst pieces of advice anybody can give anybody coming into business is follow your passion. I think that's one of the worst things you can tell anybody, because, if you told me follow my passion when I was in my teens or 20s, I'd be smoking weed, painting pictures on the side of the road type of thing, right? You know, so that's a false thing. And I also don't think you really understand what you're truly passionate about until you get some experience, right? So I think or find your passion, and then follow it, right? And so, like in your 20s, if you're listening to this in your 20s, it's a brilliant time to try a bunch of stuff out and see what you like, see what you are passionate about, what you enjoy, and also to pay attention to everything that's happening around you. Like, I never really paid attention too much in my 20s. I just kind of heads down did what I was supposed to do. I wrote a post a while ago called "Stop Doing What You're Supposed to Do," right? You're supposed to get a job. You're supposed to then, date somebody for a certain amount of time. You're supposed to get married, have a kid, buy a house, white picket fence. You're supposed to do all that stuff. I think all that supposed to do things is going to lead you down, to your point, a very bad path. Stop doing what you're supposed to do. Try different things out to figure out what you like to do. Then when you figure that out, then go all in on that. And so I think right now, and I'm going to break this down for practical reasons for kids who are listening to this. If you're in your 20s right now, try out as many things as you can possibly. Ask as many questions as you can possibly ask. Go out to lunch or go out to dinner or go out to breakfast with your CEO, your CFO, your entrepreneurial friends. Ask questions about how they got to where I used to interview in my 20s. I had 10 interview questions that I would go, as soon as I found somebody that I thought that I wanted to emulate, that I was like, wow, they're successful, I would just interview them. You mind if I grab 10 minutes of your time? I just have these questions. I'm curious about this stuff. And I started to formulate, okay, there's some common trends here. You know what I mean? And all right, this is what I like to do. And this is what I can see myself doing. And then once I learned all that, then I started to apply it in my 30s to say, now I'm going to start setting direct goals of where I want to be. I think 20s, short-term goals. This week, this month, this year. 30s, 5, 10 year goals. When I'm 35, when I'm 40, where I want to be. And I think that goal setting piece is something very practical that people should do way more of. Write them down. And again, smart, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, timely. Write them down and hold yourself accountable to them. And so it's like, what's your goal for today? My goal is to learn something today. My goal is to figure out, ask somebody that I respect a few questions to give me a different direction. My goal this year is to, by the end of the year, I want to hit my numbers and my targets and all that other stuff, but this is where I want to be. By the end of the year, I want to have a more mapped out plan of where I want to be in my next 5 years, right? So I think that if it gets down to, if there's something that people can do out of this podcast to help move in that direction, besides the split testing and the empathy and all those other things, I think it's really sit down and be realistic with some goals. And depending on where you are in your life, um, apply those goals accordingly. So you're super young, 20s, short term, figure some shit out, like day to day. Like, what do I want to do today? Like this type of thing. You're in your 30s, you got to look at, okay, kids, house, those, like, what kind of lifestyle do I want to be living? To me, it's all about a personal thing. So I'll get to this too. That's where in 30s, like in my 30s is where I was like, forget about work and my, what I want to do. Like, what do I want personally? What kind of lifestyle do I want to
Should we
live?
start with that?
I think so. Well, I think so, but my suggestion is 30s. And I'm just using buckets here, right? Because I think 20s, it's like, yeah, I want to be a millionaire and I want to drive a Ferrari and I want to build a yacht, a house and all these, all this crazy stuff. I don't think you're really realistic in your 20s. I mean, some people are. I wasn't. And so I think in their 20s, I think it should be more do it. And Gary Vee talks about this all the time. You have the energy in your 20s to do it. I'm 40 years old now. I'm losing energy. You know what I mean? Like, I don't mean that. Like, I'm still working my ass off, so I'm still traveling all over the place. But now with a kid, and my priorities have shifted drastically. Whereas in my 20s, I didn't give a shit. You know what I mean? Like, I could go try something and fail miserably at it and go sleep on my buddy's couch. You know what I mean? Worst case scenario. So I think that's the opportunity that there is when you're younger, even before your 20s, before college. I mean, I have a really hard time right now looking at college and saying that's a valuable thing to do. I think it's a social education. I think it's a great social education. I think it's a miserable actual education. I would rather, I had a financial analyst plan out, for my daughter and her, college and how much it was going to cost. And she said in 18 years, or now 15, it was going to cost a $500,000 to send my daughter to school. You got to be out of your fucking mind. Like, if that's how much it genuinely is going to cost to put my daughter through college here in the United States of America, she's not going to college. I'm going to cut her a check for $250,000. I'm going to help her start a business, and she'll be way more ahead of her friends by the time she gets out of school, right? And then just throw her in some social settings where she can learn how to interact with people. Like that to me, coming out of college with debt, I think the American system for college right now is so broken, and it puts our people in such a bad spot to not do what they want to do or what they're educated to do. They do what they have to do to pay back those bills, and they're stuck in it forever. So, goal setting, short term, 20s, 30s, push it out a little bit further and get serious. If you haven't figured it out by the time you're in your 40s, you're kind of fucked. So, like,
Well,
not
John,
for
have
anything.
you read the One Thing, the book? I'll send you a copy, mate. I've got a copy, and I have it sat on my desk. Essentially, I recommend exactly what you've done, and I say recommend as if I'm some expert in this field. I recommend it because it's what I've done and why I'm doing the podcast and why I'm not in a sales job. In that, I'm waving it up here. Everyone who's watching this on YouTube, we interviewed Jay Papazan, the co-author of this, a couple of weeks ago. So that's over in salesman.red. And we'll wrap up the show with this, John. You need your goal, and my goal was to be financially free and early retired, and that's going to come through having property and recurring revenue from that. It seems like unless the UK gets nuked or something crazy happens, that seems like the most legitimately semi-passive way of going about. And there's no passive way about having an income. That seems the most semi-passive way of going about it. And I knew that in the sales role that I was in, I could comfortably earn 100k a year, but 200k is kind of, people had done it, but it was very difficult. It was more, you were looking at luck then of all the hospitals are lining up that they just happen to need new services, new products at that point. So I wanted to then scale the ability to retire early, and the only way I could suss it out was through a business. So I'm not suggesting that every salesperson listening to this now needs to start a business, but I think that there's real value in starting some kind of side hustle, some kind of side business, whether it be it goes back to the thought leadership side of things, you are a medical device sales rep, and so you start a podcast interviewing urologists, and then you get kind of in a network, you make a little bit of money because I could have done this, and the company I worked for probably would have sponsored the podcast. I probably would have made more more money in that industry than what I'm doing here now. In hindsight, thinking about it, I had all the contacts there. But your business acronym will just increase so much, so rapidly by doing that. I'm a massive advocate of it. And John, we've covered a lot of ground here. I'm conscious of time. I'm just going to ask you one question to wrap up the show. You've answered it before, so I'm going to twist it slightly. If you could sit down with every single person who's listening to the show now, 10, 20,000 people, perhaps more in 6 months' time as the show gets more downloads, but you can only tell them one thing. You could sit down with everyone, but you can only tell them one piece of advice. What would that one piece of advice be to help them improve their ability to sell?
I mean, really, I don't want to simplify it. If you want to really simplify it, just care about your job. Think about what you're doing. Care about, like, when you ask questions, be genuine about your questions. When you educate yourself, don't just go through the motions. When you make your dials, don't just make your dials. You know what I mean? Like, think about the approaches that you're using with your dials. Care about your career. Care about educating. So I really do think that is lacking right now. And don't expect shit. I mean, the entitlement and where's my leads and all this other stuff is just, I have a really hard time with that. Like, I never ever in my life have ever relied on anybody else or wanted to rely on anybody else for my own success. This is why even if I'm a field rep and I get inbound, I get sales reps giving me meetings, like I don't count on those. I got to go find out my own deal so I can close. And if that stuff comes in, great. So I think just give a shit about your career and where you're going and think about it and just pick your head up. And here it is. All right. I talked a lot about random shit there, but again, stop doing what you're supposed to do. That would be it. Stop doing what what you think you're supposed to do. When you get married, you're supposed to have this big ornate wedding and spend a whole crap load of money and play wedding hits, wedding jams 2007 on it. And you know what I mean? And you're supposed to cut the cake. Our wedding, we ripped it up in Arizona. We got a big house and it was a party and it was a blast because I didn't do what everybody else was doing. Stop doing what everybody else is doing. Pick your head up. Don't be a sheep. 80% of this world is a sheep. They're followers. Don't be a follower. Be a leader. Try shit out. That's what I can say to everybody here is just stop going through the motions.
Amazing stuff. John, I love it. For anyone who is listening to this show now, and I say anyone, and I'm probably wrapping up 99% of the audience who wants to know more about you, what you're about, what you're doing, tell us about your website, because there's a crap load of great content on there, and then tell us a little bit about your online portal as well.
Yeah, thanks. I got my jbarrows.com, where if you go to the resource center, there's a resource library on there where I have probably about 120 pieces of content, and I'm constantly updating it. 80 to 90% of it is free. So it's just all tips and nuggets and things that I've come across in my career that have worked or haven't worked. There's that. And then my online portal, the premium content on there is my online portal that's specifically related to outbound prospecting, social selling, email, phone. It's the same thing that Salesforce, LinkedIn, a lot of those companies use to train all their sales teams. It's all the training that I do and I know. And then there's Snapchat. I'm having a blast on Snapchat, answering questions. I get right back to reps. I think it's a fantastic forum for that one-to-one interaction with reps. So for those of you out there, it's John, M as in Michael, Barrows, all one word for Snapchat, no spaces. And hit me up with a question. I'm happy to answer it. That actually, your questions, the sales reps questions, gets me thinking about different things, and therefore I then repurpose that and maybe write a blog about it. So it's a benefit to me, but hopefully I can give a benefit to somebody asking a question and giving them some insight there. So there's some ways you can engage, and obviously my blog and all those things as well.
Good stuff. We'll link to all that in the show notes. We'll put your snap code in the show notes as well. I'll snap it out on the day that this show goes live. So if you're listening to this, the date goes out and you're following me, you'll be able to check it out on there. And with that, John, thank you again, mate, we've gone down some random trails here, but I think this is a really valuable episode. I think there's a lot of, I like doing these episodes where it's not sales tips and tricks. Right. It's kind of, these episodes tend to have, I find, for me personally, when I listen to other podcasts, loads more impact than, hey, you can customize your emails using this tool. So I really appreciate you. You've been very candid with your responses and your insights. And with that, John, I want to thank you for joining us again on the Salesman podcast.
Yep. Anytime. Thanks, Will. I really appreciate it.
And there we have it. Thank you, John, for coming on the show. I appreciate your time, and the conversation's always good with you, mate. I want to thank you, Sales Nation, for tuning in. And just a quick heads up that perhaps not on tomorrow's show, but beginning of next week, I'm going to be releasing a bit more information about what the sales school is, how it's evolved, what it's turning into, and how you can get involved. Because I know I'm getting a lot of questions from you guys on social media. Now that I teased it on the episode 200 a little while back, you guys are asking all about it. So that is coming. And with that all said, I'll speak with you on tomorrow's episode.